So in today's video, I'm going to be speed painting the Fellowship of the Ring, or at least part of them. So I'll be using the Army Painter Speedpaints to pretty much get these done relatively as fast as possible, and this is all just spurred on by some old nostalgia. So let's get cracking. So during a recent sort out of my hobby space, I found all of these little miniatures. So these Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring miniatures. Not all of them, unfortunately, Strider and Legolas are missing, so they are kind of back from my childhood where I did paint those, but these ones were remaining. They were completely untouched, some of them were glued to bases, but I kind of grabbed them out, cleaned them up, and got them ready for painting. Also, during my search as well, I found this old Fellowship of the Ring rulebook as well, so the original Games Workshop one that came out with it, and that got me really excited, kind of looking through here to get some colour schemes and what I was going to do with these. So I had everybody, like I said, apart from Legolas and Strider, because they were the ones I painted back when I originally got these, when I was a young'un, I'm going to call it. So I was left over with these ones, so I got them all cleaned up and then I got them primed. And for this, I did a Zenithal prime, which is basically hit them with black and then white from above. At this point, it really started to bring out the details, and I like the way these sculpts all look. They're pretty easy to paint. There's a decent amount of detail without being over complicated like some of the later Games Workshop stuff, but they still stand out and they look pretty good. Once they were all primed and dry and ready, I started grabbing my speed paints and selecting different colours there to put on them, kind of referring back to this book and then some images online of, I guess, the Fellowship, just to kind of get an idea of what they should look like. Now, interestingly, I got quite a few of these when I was younger, and the reason why they all sat unpainted was just because of how disappointed I was by these models when I first got them. Now, it's not because they're bad sculpts or anything. There were some really, really cool sculpts, and I remember as a kid, I was massively into Warhammer Fantasy, and when these came out, I thought, well, it's going to really kind of tie in with my Lord of the Rings obsession that I had, but also I'm going to have some great, like, epic stuff that I can use with Warhammer and put in with my Warhammer Fantasy army. I was a big Orcs and Goblins collector, so I figured I could use all the Orcs and Goblins stuff from Lord of the Rings and mix and match them. But no, this was kind of before the day and age of the internet being a big thing, and these are a smaller scale, so I think they're like 25mm, and Games Workshop back then, or the Warhammer stuff was like 28, 32, they were all basically bigger. So these were tiny, like even the humans compared to things like the Empire and Bretonnia units that I had, they looked awful next to them because they were just so small, and as a kid, I was heartbroken because I had these really interesting miniatures and they just didn't really fit aesthetically with all the stuff that I wanted to play with. So as I said, I hit them all with a mixture of different speed paints. Gandalf, I kicked it off with this like runic grey. It's one of my favourite go-to ones. It's a nice light grey, and I did some of like their cloaks and waistcoats and stuff with the runic grey as well. On these, it did come out a bit pale, but it didn't really matter too much later on when I used an oil wash on them. So I hit more with that runic grey. And then I wanted to do the blue on some of them, but the blue seemed a bit too bright. So I mixed magic blue with runic grey, and I did things like Gandalf's hat. I think it was on Pippin's like waistcoat as well, I did that. A few of their cloaks as well got that treatment. And then for the greens, I used like Absolution Green for a lot of like the trousers and everything. But then I also used Camo Cloak, because this is one of my favourite greens. It's a really nice, basically a camo green. It looks fantastic on there. So I used that on quite a few of them as well. Zealot Yellow came into play for things like Samwise's hair, for, I think, it was Pippin's like waistcoat, and that's a really nice colour, because although it's relatively bright and it gives a nice yellow, it's not like an unnatural, vibrant bright. It's just, I guess, a more like a blondie thing that you'd expect to get. And then, of course, for the skin, things like Crusader skin all over them. For the reds on Boromir and Gimli, I just used blood red, and then later on when you go back in with that oil wash, it really helps to kind of darken it down and make it not stand out too much. For all the metals, I literally just mixed some silver with speed paint medium. It's one of my favourite ways to paint because it just gets that metallics running a little bit better. Got it onto all the weapons and things like the rims of the shield, and then I was pretty much ready to move on to the next stage. Now, with Frodo's sword, so a little sting there, I got him with some of that magic blue all over, and then I just went back in with a blue dry brush before I got into any of the next stages, and did things like kind of, he's got this fist that's held up, and then he's got his face as well, obviously he's got his face, and then I brushed all the blue on there as well, just to give it a glowing effect, and I quite like the way that turned out. At this stage, once they had all like the base layer of speed paints on there, I went back in with a cream dry brush and just hit them all over. Now at this stage, it can sometimes look like you've overdone it, but when you go back in there with a wash, I find that it doesn't look too bad. So I tend to just do this every single time. I get my base of speed paints on there, then go back in with that cream dry brush. I think it just looks nice, add some more highs on there, catches some of the detail, and just gives a bit of differentiation. Especially on things like your browns for like all your belts and any of the leathery bits you've got on there. It just adds a really kind of like nice contrast between the edges and through to the middle, so I like doing that. Once everything was done, so I had my dry brush done and I had all my basing done, I went back in there with my airbrush and hit them all with a gloss varnish. Now this isn't something that I used to do before moving on to the oil washes, but it is something I have started doing now just because I like to try to preserve that vibrancy that you get underneath it. And it depends what sort of look you're going for. If you use a gloss varnish and then an oil wash, it just means that you can wipe off a lot more of the oil wash afterwards. So you leave the gloss varnish to set for about 24 hours, then you do the oil wash and you can leave it on for about an hour to 2 hours and then go back in with a Q-tip. The great thing about doing the gloss varnish is it means you can really dip that Q-tip into some more spirits and really wipe off a lot of those high areas, so that way you really get that initial base coat back and you can leave some of those darks and everything else. If you want to go for more of like a grimy look or like a grimdark look or anything like that, so some fantasy models, for example, if you want to have a bit of a dirtier look, then you don't necessarily need to go for the gloss varnish. I don't tend to if I'm doing a lot of units and I want them to have that look. But what will tend to happen is that oil wash, although you can wipe it off and you can go back in there with the spirits and not worry too much about the beneath base, the underbase, the base beneath it, it gives it a nice kind of like a stain, so it will darken down those colours that you use underneath. Now, this isn't necessarily too bad, again, depending on what type of units you're doing and what sort of look you like, and I do like to do that a lot of the time. So, depending on what you want, if you really want to preserve that undercoat, I can't say it though, if you really want to preserve the colours beneath it, then using a gloss varnish beforehand is a really good idea. But if you don't mind a little bit of stainage, then yeah, just go straight for it. So I got the oil wash done, and then I left them there. I just moved on to the basing at this stage. And for the bases, it's my usual thing of using PVA, polyfiller, some basically used tea leaves thrown in there as well to give it that grainy texture, and then some black or grey paint depending how you do it. So for this I used a grey paint in there so I could get that rock done, got it all down, and then just put some Nuln Oil over there as well, just to kind of darken it down so it didn't stand out too much. Rimmed the bases, finished. Voila, we have our speed painted Fellowship of the Ring, -2 of course. And I've got to say, I really like these. Again, they are smaller than so many others, but they'd be great for using as like Dungeons and Dragons miniatures. If I ever do get into the Lord of the Rings game as well, then potentially that's something there that I could play with. But I like them. I think they look decent enough. The bases don't detract from them. The colours all still pop as well. I think there's a good amount of colours on there. And I've got to say, I really do enjoy using speed paints. I've been using the newer contrast paints recently just to try them out. And they've got some gorgeously vibrant colours in there. But they're a bit of a pain to use because they're not necessarily as contrasty as I would like. The speed paints I really like, and the initial contrast paints, the first batch, I really like those as well. So I think they came out really nicely. Very pleased with how all of that's looking. So let me know in the comments, what do you think of the Fellowship there? Are you excited for the new series as well? That should be coming out soon. I'm apprehensively excited. I don't know what to expect, but yeah. Let's move on to some glamour shots so you can have a look at these. And also as well, I hope you've enjoyed that video. If you have, hit the like and subscribe button. Come along for some more 3D printing and painting content. And as well, if you want to head on over to my Discord channel, we chat all things hobby and painting and all of that jazz. It'd be great to see you there. If you really want to support the channel, head on over to my Patreon. It just helps me to keep making these videos. So here they are. Now, I would have a little bit of Lord of the Rings music at this stage, but obviously I will get copyrighted to hell. So instead, we have a special guest. Okay, that's enough of that now. Get out. No, you're done. Special guest is cancelled.